Judge Scheindlin, thank you so much for joining us at the University of Cincinnati College of Law this year for the Judge in Residence program. We're so pleased to have you.
Thank you. It was nice to be here.
Thank you. So you have a very illustrious career background. You have really spanned the map in terms of what your experience includes. You have been a judge at the Southern District of New York. You were formerly a magistrate judge for the Eastern District of New York. You were a partner at Struck and Struck and Lavin, where you are currently of counsel, and have authored a casebook on e-discovery. You have really spanned the map in terms of really your legal career. Could you sort of expound upon what led you to the legal profession and whether or not you really saw your career unfolding the way that it did?
I can try to answer that, but you're going to be surprised by the answers. I'd never planned to be a lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers, no family members, no friends. I really didn't know what lawyers did. I kind of became a lawyer by default. So my first field was Chinese and Japanese history, wow. And I was a professor of Chinese and Japanese history, but I couldn't master Chinese. It was just too hard for me. So I gave up. I was working on a PhD and gave up and said, well, what do I do now? And it struck me that law is a very general background type education. You don't need to be a scientist like medical school. You just have to have a good general education, and I figured you'd get more of it by going to law school. So I went, but I didn't have any big plans, and I was in a small town. I was in Ithaca, New York. I was at Cornell. I was a faculty wife, and my husband had an appointment at Cornell, so I just sort of did it. And I thought I'd end up doing divorces and real estate closings and maybe a will or two, and that's what I thought. And then he got a job in New York City, so I had to transfer, and I finished at Columbia University. And once I was in the big city, I started listening to the other kids, and they all wanted to get clerkships and be assistant U.S. attorneys and all of that. So that's what I did too. I got a federal clerkship, I went to a big firm, I was an assistant U.S. attorney, and then one thing led to another, and the rest sort of is history. But I can't say I started out with some grand plan of becoming a judge.
That is so interesting. I would say that most of the students here at the law school sort of feel the same way. Something drew them to the legal profession, but it's hard to put a finger on it. It's sort of far and few between those who really do come in with a vision. But it's comforting to know that you can still make a career doing something with maybe not the clearest vision going into it.
Oh, very much so. I did not have a plan. I did not have a vision. A lot of things just happened to me. Although, as I said, when I got to New York, I did take a very classic path.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as a fellow female in the legal profession, could you expound upon maybe any sort of challenges that you encountered as a female and maybe advice that you have for young female law students who are going in and entering the profession?
Well, I can try to answer that one too, but what's interesting to me is how little has changed in 35 or 40 years. I graduated law school in 1975, so we are talking 43 years since I graduated. And then women were a clear minority of the class. My class at Cornell was less than 10% women, maybe at Columbia a little bit higher because it was an urban area. But now the graduating class is 52% women or 51% women. So it should be better, but it really isn't. We see statistics that surprise us in terms of the lack of change. So for example, equity partners in law firms still hover between 18 and 20% women. General counsels, however, have moved from maybe 1% women when I graduated to 25% women today, and that should help because general counsels do give away work. In the public sector, women do very well. So in terms of assistant U.S. attorneys or state court prosecutors, there's a lot more equality. Women do not get equal pay in the law. They do not get equal promotions. So there's still a lot to be done. Now, what's the advice? The advice is for a woman to be aggressive in stating what she wants. We call it the ask. When you get to your job, whatever job you take, whether it's a law firm, whether it's public sector, you need to make known what you expect and what you want in a nice way. Right. If you go to a firm, let's say you choose litigation, you need to say, I want to go to court. I want to take a deposition. Please put me on a trial team. And you need to ask repeatedly, nicely, but repeatedly, insistently, without being abrasive. So I think that's one thing that women need to not be retiring, to be assertive, but in a nice way. The other thing is to identify what appeals to you. Not everybody is meant to be a litigator. Not everybody's meant to walk around a courtroom. Some people are really happy doing a corporate transaction or a real estate deal, and that's fine. We have no reason to criticize one another.
Right.
So whatever you choose needs to suit you and your personality and your circumstances. One thing we talk about a lot for women is work-life balance, because one reason maybe they end up only 35% of practicing lawyers. I don't know if you know that although they graduate at 52%, of the profession today, only 35% are women. So where do they go?
Right,
Where are they disappearing to? Maybe one of the issues is work-life balance, that people try to do both and it's not easy. And so what I counsel young women, I say, if you feel guilty, then you're doing something wrong. You need to get the balance where you don't feel guilt. If you stay at work away from the family, that's okay if you don't feel guilty. If you stay at family, not work, that's okay if you don't feel guilty. So you have to sort of assess how you feel.
Do what is right for you.
That's right. It's very individual.
And you said you had 2 children while you were in law school.
Just before I got there.
So you certainly seem to balance lots of things at once very, very well. Were there certain skills that you either came into law school with or honed during law school, whether it was on law review or in class or another organization, that you think served you well in your career?
I think for me, I began working very young. I lost my father when I was only 13. We were not a family with much money, so I always worked. I went to school and had a job since 14 years old. So I always learned to be very organized in my use of time. I had to be. I really had to earn a little bit of a living at that tender age. And in that generation, you don't even hear about it now, but you go home and give your mom the check. So the family needed that help, but that was from 14 on. So I always felt efficient. I always felt organized. And when I got to law school with one 4-month-old and one 22-month-old, I didn't have any time to fool around. So I got my work done quickly, organized, and then I stopped. Then it was time for dinner. Then it was time to put babies to bed. Then I could go back to reading the cases if I wanted to. But I used my time well. I think some of the younger students who didn't have family responsibilities had sort of other concerns. They spent hours talking about, I don't know what, their personal problems, their boyfriend problems, their girlfriend problems, their parent problems, their clothes, whatever it was, and they lost a lot of time with a lot of concerns. And I don't mean to be putting down those concerns. It's natural for that age, but I think some of the students who had been out for a while in the work world or having a family or both had an advantage. I really do.
Certainly, and a different sense of focus.
Yes, I think that the older students, the ones who had, say, 5 years from college, had done something. In that era, the men had been in the Vietnam War, and a lot of them are coming back as war veterans. So the men had been, as I said, military veterans. So they were a little older, a little more experienced also than the younger kids, and I think they had an advantage, actually.
I'm sure of that. So now you have retired from the bench. Can you compare or contrast maybe some of what your day is like now as compared to when it was when you were a judge?
I can. So as a judge, the biggest difference to me is that I was sitting in one place all day, every day. I never went anywhere. I went straight to the courthouse, stayed there, went home, and then the next day back to the courthouse. And all my work came through the cases filed in the courthouse. There was not all that much outside variety. There's a lot of variety of the cases that a federal judge gets, but you're not doing too much outside the building. Now it seems like I'm always on the move. I get cases, arbitrations and mediations, and they're held in different locations. I'm on 3 nonprofit boards, so I am active with that. I go to board meetings. I teach at NYU Law School, so I run out and teach. I speak all over the country. I do media stuff. I do some radio and TV. So I do a lot more different things. There's tremendous variety, and my schedule is complicated, and I'm always moving. It's funny, I'm back on the subways. I didn't go on the subways for years because I always walked to work and walked home. I hadn't taken a subway. Now I'm running around on the subways during the day to this meeting and that meeting, or an arbitration or a mediation or whatever it is, or the school, the law school. So
was that a pace you were expecting, or?
I hadn't really thought about it, and then there it was, a lot of physical movement and a much more complex schedule. I had to remember to be here at 2 and there at 4 and there at 7 and.
Well, just understanding your schedule, it makes me tired as a law student who sits in one chair almost all day long.
Right. That's probably the biggest difference, is that it was so unitary. You went to one spot, and you sat on the bench, or in chambers, that's it, bench or chambers, and all the work came from one source. Now I have to worry about where the work comes from. I don't love that part, that you have to be sure to get business. That was not natural. That was a tough transition. But as long as the email and phone ring occasionally, that's enough for me. I don't need to have 40 hours every week of that kind of work.
Right,
So because then I couldn't do the other things I'm enjoying.
Certainly, and spend time with your 2 grandchildren.
Yeah, I get to do that a little bit.
So Judge Scheindlin, you currently serve as an arbitrator and mediator. Could you explain a little bit about what that means and what it looks like on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. So arbitration and mediation are very different. Mediation is a voluntary project. Nobody makes any rulings, nobody makes any decisions. You just try to bring the parties together to settle a case. And to prepare, you read submissions from the parties so you know what the case is about. You try to find the weak spots and the strong spots. And you meet separately with each side. It's always ex parte. You talk to one side and you tell them what you think of some of the issues. They tell you what they're really looking for. You go to the other side, you do the same thing. They tell you what they see as their strengths or weaknesses, what they see as the strengths or weaknesses of the other side, and what they're willing to do. And then you kind of negotiate back and forth, and this can take 10, 12 hours. There's some really long days, and either the case settles or it doesn't. And sometimes it doesn't, but then you hear a week later that it did. So you know that, so you know that your work did pay off even if they didn't settle that night. So that's mediation. Arbitration is completely different. Arbitration is by contract. It's probably in the contract that any dispute arising under this contract will be arbitrated by, and then it fills in the name. So typically it's the American Arbitration Association, AAA, which I'm now with. And the parties select 3 arbitrators, sometimes 1, depending on what the contract says, either 1 or 3. If it's 3, there's a chair and 2 wings, and you actually have a trial in a room just like this that we're sitting in. Witnesses are sworn, witnesses are called, cross-examined, documents are entered in evidence, and you have a whole trial record, and then you have to write an award, which is the same as an opinion. The only difference between an award and an opinion, it's no precedent. It's a private process, so it's not like court. Nobody's going to read it, other than the parties, of course. It has no appeal, can't go to a higher court. It's final. The parties do sometimes try to challenge it. The losing party goes to court and says, you know, the arbitrator ignored the law or whatever, but it rarely works. It's very rare to overturn an arbitration award. Very rare. Yes, they try, but they rarely succeed. I suspect less than 5% are overturned. But it can be very complex. I'm sitting now on an arbitration involving an intercreditor dispute in a bankruptcy. There was between the creditors. So the bankruptcy was solved, but now they're fighting with each other as to who got the right amount of money. And they're fighting over hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm the chair of that panel, so I'm going to have to write the award in this very complex bankruptcy matter. So it's interesting. And I've had arbitrations that have to do with employment issues. Somebody was let go or fired or didn't get the pay increase that they expected, and they sue, and there's an arbitration clause in the employment agreement, so they have to arbitrate that. I've had union arbitrations. I have one coming up in June. That's a product liability one. That's interesting. I think the parties are just agreeing to take it out of a courtroom to get a faster result. So they're actually in court on an accident case, big accident, big product malfunction, and they're just agreeing to arbitrate. So it wasn't in a contract. They're just saying, this is faster. Let's just take it out of court, give it to the... Is
that fairly unusual?
I think it is, but I've had 2 like that were in court, and the parties just said, it's fast, because you can get a firm date, no appeal, final order, that's done. So I think people like that. So when you say day-to-day life, there really isn't a day-to-day life. Sometimes I have an arbitration, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I have a mediation, sometimes I don't. So it's not like court, which was every day. And of course, there's no criminal law aspect, and I do miss that.
Do you miss that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, yes and no. Sentencing was no fun. I didn't like sentencing, and I sentenced probably 2,000 people over a lot of years. And that's always difficult and painful. So I don't miss sentencing, but the issues in criminal law I do care about a lot. So now I have to just do that through my pro bono or board work for the nonprofits, or sometimes the op-eds I write. That's how I keep in touch with criminal law issues. So that's my answer with respect to arbitration and mediation.
On that same vein, can you speak about some of the causes that are very close to your heart, including some of the positions you hold?
Yes, well, I've mentioned I'm on 3 nonprofit boards. The 3 are the American Constitution Society, which is ACS. Your law school might have an ACS chapter.
Yes, we do.
Good, many schools do. And the ACS is sort of the answer to the Federalist Society. So on the right-hand side is the Federalist Society, on the left-hand side is the ACS. And they work on being sure that young lawyers in law schools have an opportunity to hear speakers discuss important issues of the day from their perspective. So I love the ACS. And then I'm on a board called the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. And this was started under President Kennedy, who said he had a call for lawyers to get involved in the civil rights movement. So after that call, this organization was set up. It's now 60 or 65 years old, and it gets involved in civil rights issues. So now it's involved with bail issues, private prisons, voting rights, so a whole lot of issues that I really care about. Transgender issues, just any issues that might involve discrimination,
Sure. Particularly
particularly racial. They do like to focus on race. And the third organization I'm on the board of is called the Bronx Defenders, which is a big New York-based defender organization, criminal defense. But besides doing everyday defense, they also have an immigration project, they have a family project. They look at it all holistically.
Okay.
So when someone's arrested, this affects the family too. There might be support issues, there might be school issues. So they do it in a holistic way. It's really very, very exciting group, the Bronx Defenders, and they bring affirmative cases too.
Oh, wow.
So they're an interesting organization. So those are some of the causes that are important to me, and it just links up through the 3 nonprofit boards. Also gives me the issues that I want to write about and speak about. You know, I've been interested
Sure.
in race and policing,
Right.
so I do write about policing issues and try to keep up.
That's a great way to give back to the community.
It is, right.
And also to the legal profession.
True, and when I was on the court, I couldn't do that. That's one of the things you
Right.
can't do. You can't be on an advocacy type
Oh,
board.
really?
No,
Okay.
no, judge can't be on a board.
Well,
So
that makes sense.
so this is something that I'm enjoying doing.
I'm certain of that. What advice would you give a student at UC Law or students in general who are interested in pursuing a federal clerkship after law school? And do you think that there is a lot of value in doing that?
Oh, I think there's tremendous value in having federal court clerkship. I think it's actually the best job someone can have, particularly if they want to be a litigator. Even if they don't, I think it's great training to see what happens to the corporate deal that unravels, or the real estate transaction that goes south, or the contract that falls through, or the non-compete that somebody violates. So it's good to see that anyway, but particularly if you want to litigate, to see, you know, good lawyers in court, arguing a motion, trying a case, examining a witness at a hearing, it's invaluable. And then getting to know your judge and see how the other side of the bench makes a decision, doing the research, perfecting your writing, that's terribly important. We would, when I did a big opinion, we would go through draft after draft after draft, and I was quite the perfectionist. Every comma, every footnote, every citation, every sentence was labored over, because an opinion has precedential value, and people read it, and I know they read some of my opinions a lot, so we were very careful about opinions. And in terms of what one's looking for in a law clerk, you're looking for a law student who's shown a great love of writing, at least to me. That's the most important, not personality, because that's what I would be looking for if I was hiring a prosecutor or a trial lawyer for my law firm. But for the chambers, I don't really care much about personality. I want to know that they're perfectionists, that they write well, they write quickly, they do good research, and they really care about the final product. So that's what I think judges are looking for. But I think a student should definitely want that job if they have the skills for it. Of course, they have to be able to sit still and sit quietly for a whole year. And I understand some of the judges here require more than a year. I met a judge yesterday who said he has 4-year clerks. I couldn't believe that. But in any event, I only used them for 1 year because it was a tiring job. They worked hard for me, long week, maybe 50 to 60 hours a week. So I don't think they would want to do it more than a year. But it's something well worth having if that's your thing.
Yes, that's great advice. And I know that that is something that's very interesting to students, but it's hard to learn or really understand what judges are looking for, because it's hard to get that one-to-one FaceTime with them outside of the judge in residence program.
Yeah, well, they're looking for somebody interested in writing. And my advice to law students who want a federal court clerkship is to apply very widely and not be snotty about
Right.
it, meaning there are magistrate judges, there are bankruptcy judges, there are district judges, and then there are court of appeals judges. And you shouldn't narrow your search and say, oh, I'm only going to go to a court of appeals. I'm not going to go to those 3 lower court judges. Well, that's silly because each one has something special to offer. The district court is very unlike the circuit court because that's a trial court. You see lawyers in the courtroom. In the Court of Appeals, all you see is oral arguments. You never
Right.
see a witness, you never see a cross-examination. You just read the record all day, and then comes the 20-minute oral argument. So it's very different. And many of my clerks did district and circuit, and they all like district better.
Really?
And that's,
Yes.
well, that's where the action is.
Right.
Watching a criminal trial is pretty exciting. So they all like the district court. And then the magistrate judges do a lot of settlement work,
Okay.
and that's very interesting to watch. And they do a lot of discovery decisions, and that's interesting. And of course, bankruptcy judges do very complex bankruptcy issues. So they're all interesting, and they all offer that same skill of learning to write and be very careful about about your final product.
My last question for you is something that a question or a statement that I received as a aspiring young law student is that there are too many lawyers either in the city of Cincinnati or in the United States. What is your answer to that question? Do you think that is a correct statement or not?
I don't. I think lawyers do a lot of good. I think they raise the issues that need to be raised in a civil society. And the way things are, there's not enough people to raise those issues. So as you know, lawyers are on the forefront of some of these social changes that I think have been to the good, whether we talk about abortion rights or whether we talk about the rights of gay people, whether we now talk about trying to get assault weapons out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, we talk about immigrants' rights, whether we talk about school integration, that's already 60 years ago. But the point is the courts have been on the forefront of all this, and you don't get to court if you don't have lawyers bringing the cases.
Right.
The court can't sort of say, I want to address X or Y. No, it has to be a case that a lawyer has brought. I forgot to mention voting rights and gerrymandering and all of that.
Right.
So there's so many issues that lawyers have addressed. Now, in some countries, lawyers are under attack. Lawyers are really being attacked. I'm on one bar association committee that talks about international safety and rights for lawyers so that they aren't attacked and prosecuted and arrested for their views.
Wow.
In some countries, lawyers are vulnerable to government crackdown, and the government arrests them and puts them away. So it can be really dangerous. So we, as a bar committee, try to support lawyers around the country who are speaking out and bringing important cases, trying to make sure that democratic values in their country are respected. And sometimes judges are under attack in those countries too. So it's our mission as a bar association committee that I'm on to be sure that lawyers are protected and have the right to speak out, because I think they do important work around the world in terms of human rights and civil rights. So I think the more lawyers, the better.
That's very reassuring. Judge Scheindlin, thank you so much for your advice for the current law students here at UC Law, as well as those who are prospective students. I know that your insight has been invaluable to us students over the past 3 days, and we are so glad that you were able to spend your week with us.
Well, thank you. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you very much.